The morning sun filtered through the gauze curtains of Margaret Chen's modest two-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York. At 62, Margaret had developed a routine that rarely varied. Green tea at 6:30 a.m., morning news at 7:00, and a careful review of her mail before heading to her job at the community center. This Tuesday morning in early March started like any other, with the radiator clanking its familiar rhythm and the sounds of traffic already building on Northern Boulevard. Margaret sorted through the stack of mail she'd collected from her lobby mailbox the previous evening. Bills, advertisements, a postcard from her sister in California. Then her fingers paused on an envelope bearing the logo of First National Credit Union. Her brow furrowed. She didn't have an account with First National. Probably just another credit card offer, she muttered to herself, reaching for her letter opener. But as she unfolded the document inside, her blood ran cold. It wasn't an offer. It was a delinquency notice for a $15,000 personal loan taken out in her name 4 months ago. The payments were already 2 months behind. Margaret's hands trembled as she read through the document again, certain she must be misunderstanding. The loan application showed her social security number, her date of birth, her previous addresses, all correct. But she had never applied for this loan. She had never even set foot in a First National Credit Union branch. The morning tea sat forgotten as Margaret fumbled for her reading glasses and examined every detail of the notice. The loan had been approved in November, with monthly payments of $450 that were supposed to begin in December. According to the letter, not a single payment had been made, and the account was now seriously delinquent. Late fees and penalties had already pushed the amount owed to nearly $16,000. Margaret's first instinct was to call the credit union, but a glance at the clock showed it was only 7:15 a.m. They wouldn't open until 9. She paced her small kitchen, her mind racing through possibilities. Identity theft was her first thought, but something nagged at her. The application included an email address she didn't recognize. sophie.chen2000@gmail.com. Sophie, her daughter's name. No, Margaret said aloud to the empty kitchen. She couldn't, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Sophie, her only child, had been struggling financially since losing her marketing job 8 months ago. At 24, she had moved back home briefly before finding a small studio apartment in Astoria. Margaret had helped her with the security deposit and first month's rent, despite her own tight budget. They'd had arguments about money, about Sophie's spending habits, about her refusal to take a more stable job while she pursued her dreams of starting her own social media consulting firm. Margaret picked up her phone, then set it down again. She needed to think clearly before confronting anyone. She made herself sit at the kitchen table and drink her now lukewarm tea, forcing her breathing to slow. Outside, she could hear her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, starting her day, the familiar sounds of her morning routine bleeding through the thin walls. Normal life continuing while Margaret's world tilted off its axis. By 8:45 a.m., Margaret had showered, dressed in her work clothes, a neat cardigan over slacks, and prepared herself mentally for the phone call. She dialed the number on the letterhead, navigating through the automated menu until she reached a human being. First National Credit Union. This is Jason speaking. How may I help you today? Yes, hello. My name is Margaret Chen, and I've received a delinquency notice for a loan I never took out. She kept her voice steady, professional. I'm sorry to hear that, Ms. Chen. Let me pull up your account. Can you please verify your social security number and date of birth? Margaret provided the information, hearing Jason's keyboard clicking in the background. All right, I see the account here, showing a personal loan for $15,000 originated on November 15th, currently past due by $900 plus late fees. How can I help you with this today? As I said, I never took out this loan. I've never even been to your credit union. This has to be some kind of mistake or fraud. Jason's tone shifted, becoming more formal. I understand your concern, Ms. Chen. In cases of suspected fraud, I'll need to transfer you to our security department. They'll be able to review the application details and help you file a dispute if necessary. Please hold while I transfer you. The hold music was generically cheerful, a stark contrast to the knot in Margaret's stomach. After several minutes, a new voice came on the line. Security department, this is Valerie. I understand you have concerns about a loan on your account. Margaret explained the situation again, her frustration growing with each retelling. I see, Valerie said. Looking at the application, it was submitted online on November 14th at 11:47 p.m. The IP address shows it came from Queens, New York. The application included pay stubs from Chen Marketing Solutions, LLC, and showed a monthly income of $4,500. Chen Marketing Solutions? Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. That was the name Sophie had chosen for her startup. Yes, ma'am. The documents were uploaded as PDFs. The signature on the loan agreement, well, It matches the signature we have on file from when the account was opened. What do you mean, the signature on file? I told you I've never had an account with you. Valerie paused. Actually, Ms. Chen, our records show you've been a customer since 2018. You have a checking account with us, though it's been dormant for about 2 years. The account was opened in person at our Forest Hills branch. Margaret's mind reeled. 2018. That was the year Sophie graduated from high school. Margaret remembered being overwhelmed with college preparations, financial aid forms, orientation schedules. Could Sophie have? No. She would have been only 18 then. I need to see these documents, Margaret said firmly. Can you email them to me? I can't email them for security reasons, but you're welcome to come to any branch with proper identification, and we can provide copies. You'll also want to file a formal fraud claim, which needs to be done in person anyway. Fine, I'll come today. Which branch should I go to? Any branch can help you, but since the account was opened in Forest Hills, they might have additional records. They're open until 6 p.m. today. Margaret ended the call and immediately dialed her supervisor at the community center. Linda, it's Margaret. I'm sorry, but I have a family emergency. I won't be able to come in today. Linda's voice was full of concern. Oh no, is everything okay? Is it your sister? No, it's a financial matter I need to sort out urgently. I'll explain later. I should be in tomorrow. Of course, take care of whatever you need to. We'll manage here. Margaret hung up and stood in her kitchen, decision made. But before going to the credit union, she needed to do one more thing. She pulled up her banking app and checked her credit report, something she did religiously every few months. Her excellent credit score, built over decades of careful financial management, had dropped by nearly 100 points. The First National loan showed up clearly, along with its delinquent status. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Sophie. Hey, Mom, are you free for lunch this week? I have some exciting news about the business. Love you. Margaret stared at the message, her heart breaking a little. She typed and deleted several responses before finally sending, We need to talk. Can you come by tonight? The response was immediate. Everything okay? You're scaring me. Just come by after 7. It's important. Mom, what's wrong? Are you sick? Margaret didn't respond. She couldn't. Not yet. She gathered the fraudulent loan notice, her identification, and her social security card, placing them carefully in her purse. The Forest Hills branch was only a 20-minute subway ride away. As she locked her apartment door, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. She looked older than her 62 years, worry etched in the lines around her eyes. The subway platform was crowded with the tail end of morning rush hour. Margaret found a seat on the E-train and tried to organize her thoughts. If Sophie had done this, and Margaret's heart still refused to fully believe it, then why? Desperation? Entitlement? Had Margaret failed as a mother, raising a daughter who could steal from her own parent? She thought back to Sophie's childhood, a bright, creative girl who'd excelled in school, perhaps a bit spoiled. Margaret admitted that now. After the divorce when Sophie was 10, Margaret had overcompensated, trying to be both parents, trying to ensure Sophie never felt the financial insecurity that Margaret herself had grown up with in immigrant parents' household. Maybe that had been her mistake. The train screeched to a halt at Forest Hills 71st Avenue. Margaret emerged into the gray March morning, the air damp with the promise of rain. The credit union was a short walk from the station, its modern glass facade standing out among the older brick buildings. Inside, Margaret approached the reception desk. I need to speak with someone about a fraudulent loan on my account. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me get you to one of our account specialists. Can I have your name? Margaret Chen. Please have a seat, Ms. Chen. Someone will be with you shortly. Margaret sat in the waiting area, watching other customers come and go. A young couple excitedly discussing their first home loan. An elderly man making a deposit. Normal banking activities for people whose children hadn't potentially betrayed them. Ms. Chen, a woman in her 30s with a kind face, approached. I'm Diana Martinez, one of the account specialists. Please come with me. Diana led her to a small office and closed the door. I understand you have concerns about a loan on your account. How can I help? Margaret explained the situation once more, showing Diana the delinquency notice. Diana's fingers flew over her keyboard, pulling up records. I see the loan here, and I can confirm what our security department told you. The loan was applied for online, but... She paused, frowning at her screen. There's something interesting. The checking account associated with this loan shows several deposits from Chen Marketing Solutions LLC in the months leading up to the loan application. Can you show me those? Diana turned her monitor so Margaret could see. There they were. Regular deposits of $4,500, starting in August and continuing through October. Just enough to establish a pattern of income for a loan application. These deposits, Margaret said slowly. Where did they come from? They appeared to be electronic transfers from a business account at another bank. The name on the business account is Sophie M. Chen. Margaret closed her eyes. The evidence was mounting, becoming impossible to deny. I need copies of everything, Margaret said. The loan application, all the documents submitted, the signature cards, transaction history, everything. Of course. It will take me a few minutes to print everything. While I do that, would you like to begin the fraud claim process? Margaret hesitated. Filing a fraud claim would start an investigation. If Sophie had done this, it could lead to criminal charges against her own daughter. Can I have some time to review everything first? Before I file the claim? Diana looked sympathetic. Of course. You have some time, though I should mention that the longer you wait, the more difficult it can be to dispute the charges, and the delinquency will continue to affect your credit. I understand. I need to be sure. While Diana printed the documents, Margaret's phone buzzed again. Sophie. Mom, you're really freaking me out. Did something happen? I can come by earlier if you need me. Margaret turned the phone face down without responding. 20 minutes later, she left the credit union with a manila folder full of evidence. The signature on the loan documents looked like hers. Practiced? Perhaps, but not perfect. The employment verification from Chen Marketing Solutions was professionally done, complete with a letterhead Sophie must have designed herself. The careful planning that had gone into this deception was what hurt the most. This wasn't a moment of desperate impulse. This was calculated. The rain had started while she was inside, a cold drizzle that matched her mood. Margaret stood under the credit union's awning, unsure where to go next. Home felt suffocating. Work was out of the question. She noticed a small diner across the street and decided she needed coffee and time to think. The diner was nearly empty in the post-breakfast lull. Margaret chose a booth in the back and ordered black coffee, spreading the documents across the table. Page by page, she reviewed the evidence of her daughter's betrayal. The fake pay stubs showed attention to detail, proper deductions, realistic numbers. Sophie had even included a business bank statement showing regular income flowing into Chen Marketing Solutions. Rough day? The waitress, a woman about Margaret's age with tired eyes, refilled her coffee cup. Margaret managed a weak smile. You could say that. Well, whatever it is, honey, this too shall pass. That's what my mother always said, and she was usually right. After the waitress moved on, Margaret pulled out her phone and did something she'd been avoiding. She Googled Chen Marketing Solutions LLC. A basic website appeared, professional-looking with stock photos and vague promises about elevating your brand's social media presence. The contact email was the same one from the loan application. There was even a LinkedIn page for the company, showing Sophie as CEO and founder, with a handful of connections and posts about entrepreneurship and following your dreams. The irony wasn't lost on Margaret. Sophie had created an elaborate fiction to support her real dream, funded by her mother's stolen identity and good credit. The business might even be legitimate now, built on a foundation of fraud. Margaret's coffee grew cold as she sat in that booth for over an hour, paralyzed by the decision ahead of her. Report her daughter and potentially send her to jail? Absorb the debt herself, destroying her retirement savings and credit? Try to work out some arrangement? She thought about calling her sister in California, but Helen would just say, I told you so. Helen had always thought Margaret was too soft on Sophie, too quick to bail her out of problems. You're not helping her by cushioning every fall, Helen had said during their last conversation about Sophie's job loss. Sometimes people need to face consequences. But those consequences had never included criminal charges. Finally, as the lunch crowd began to filter in, Margaret gathered her documents and left the diner. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining. She walked slowly to the subway, her mind still churning. One thing was certain, she couldn't face this alone. She needed legal advice before confronting Sophie. Back in her apartment, Margaret looked up attorneys specializing in identity theft and fraud. The consultations alone would cost hundreds of dollars she didn't have. She was trapped between her daughter's crime and her own financial limitations. Her landline rang, the community center. She let it go to voicemail, unable to explain why she wasn't at work. Everything in her life felt suspended, waiting for tonight's confrontation with Sophie. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the same spot where she'd discovered the betrayal that morning. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing down everything she wanted to say to her daughter. The questions she needed answered, the pain she needed to express. But every sentence felt inadequate. How do you ask your child why they chose to destroy your trust, your credit, your future security? As afternoon faded to evening, Margaret made one decision. Whatever happened with Sophie tonight, tomorrow she would go to a notary's office. She needed to document everything, create a legal record of what had happened. Whether she used it or not would depend on Sophie's explanation. if there even was one that could justify this betrayal. The radiator clanked again, its rhythm unchanged by the day's revelations. Margaret Chen sat in her small queen's apartment, surrounded by evidence of her daughter's deception, and waited for 7 p.m. Waited to face the child she'd raised, loved, and apparently failed in some fundamental way. The waiting was the hardest part, but she knew the conversation ahead would be worse. Outside, New York City continued its relentless pace, indifferent to one mother's broken heart and shattered trust. But Margaret had lived through worse. Divorce, financial struggles, the challenges of single parenthood. She would survive this too, though she couldn't yet imagine how. The legal pad before her remained mostly blank, because how could words capture the devastation of discovering your child capable of such calculated betrayal? The clock on the kitchen wall ticked toward evening, each second bringing her closer to a confrontation that would forever change her relationship with her daughter. Margaret Chen, 62 years old with excellent credit until 4 months ago, sat and waited and tried to prepare for the unprepared-for moment when she would look into Sophie's eyes and ask the simple question that had no simple answer. Why? Tentar novamente gok editar, Chapter 2, The Confrontation. The knock came at 7:03 p.m. Margaret had been sitting in her living room for the past half hour, the folder of evidence on the coffee table before her, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, the soft gray sweater Sophie had given her last Christmas, though now the irony of wearing it felt sharp. "It's open," Margaret called, her voice steadier than she felt. Sophie burst in with her characteristic energy, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. "Mom, seriously, what's going on? Your texts had me worried sick all day. I almost left work early, but we had this huge client presentation and—" She stopped mid-sentence, taking in her mother's rigid posture, the formal arrangement of documents on the table. "Mom? Sit down, Sophie." Something in Margaret's tone made Sophie's face pale. She moved cautiously to the armchair across from her mother, her usual animated demeanor subdued. She was still in her work clothes, a blazer over jeans, the uniform of the aspiring entrepreneur. Her laptop bag slipped from her shoulder to the floor with a soft thud. "Before we begin," Margaret said, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me the truth. Just one. Think carefully before you answer. Is there anything you need to tell me about? Anything involving money?" Sophie's eyes darted to the folder on the table, then back to her mother's face. Margaret watched her daughter's expression cycle through confusion, calculation, and finally, a dawning horror that confirmed everything. "Mom, The truth, Sophie. You owe me that much." Sophie's shoulders sagged. She pressed her palms against her thighs, staring at the worn carpet. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You got the notice. This morning." Margaret opened the folder, spreading the papers across the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. $15,000. In my name. Using my social security number. My credit history. My good name that I've spent 40 years building. Sophie flinched at each statement. "I was going to pay it back. I swear, Mom, I had a plan." "A plan?" Margaret's composure cracked. "Your plan was to steal my identity? To commit fraud? To destroy my credit without even telling me? It wasn't supposed to go like this." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. The business was taking off. I had 3 major clients lined up. The loan was just to bridge the gap until the contracts came through. But then Davidson Communications pulled out, and Chen Industries decided to go with another firm, and suddenly I couldn't make the payments, and I kept thinking, next month I'd have the money. "Stop." Margaret held up her hand. "I don't want to hear about your business plans. I want to know how you could do this to me, your own mother. How could you look me in the eye over Thanksgiving dinner, over Christmas presents, knowing what you'd done?" Sophie was crying now, mascara running in dark streams down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think—" "No, you did think. This wasn't impulse, Sophie. You created fake pay stubs. You forged my signature. You even set up a checking account in my name years ago, didn't you? When you were 18? Sophie's head snapped up. "How did you—" "The credit union told me. 2018. Right before you left for college. What was the plan then? Were you always intending to do this someday?" "No." Sophie wiped her face with her sleeve, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that Margaret's heart clenched. "No, it wasn't like that. Remember when I got that summer job at the mall? They had this promotion where if you opened a checking account, you got a $200 bonus. But I wasn't 18 yet. I was still 17. My birthday wasn't until September. So I used your information. I was going to close it after I got the bonus, but then I went to college and forgot about it." "You forgot about it." Margaret's voice was flat. "And then, conveniently, You remembered it when you needed to establish a pattern of fake deposits to qualify for a loan? Sophie's silence was answer enough. Margaret stood, needing to move, needing distance from the daughter she no longer recognized. She walked to the window, looking out at the street below. A couple hurried past under a shared umbrella. Normal people living normal lives where children didn't betray their parents' trust. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Margaret asked without turning around. "My credit score has dropped 100 points. I'm being threatened with collections. This could affect my ability to rent an apartment, get a car loan, even keep my job if they run a credit check. And retirement? The small safety net I've been building? That might have to go to paying off your debt." "I'll pay it back," Sophie said desperately. "Every penny. With interest. The business is starting to turn around. I just landed a contract with that new restaurant chain." "With what credit?" Margaret turned to face her. "You couldn't get a loan in your own name. That's why you stole mine." Sophie fell silent again, the truth hanging between them like a blade. "Why didn't you come to me?" Margaret asked, and this time her voice broke. "Why didn't you just ask for help?" "Because you would have said no," Sophie burst out. "You would have given me another lecture about being practical, about taking a corporate job, about how my business was just a pipe dream. You've never believed in me, Mom. Never. That's not true, isn't it? Every time I talked about my plans, you'd get this look. This worried, disappointed look, like you were already seeing me fail." Margaret returned to the couch, suddenly exhausted. "I worried because I love you. Because I've been where you are, young and full of dreams and not understanding how hard the world can be. But that didn't give you the right to do this." "I know." Sophie's voice was small again. "I know it didn't. But I was desperate, Mom. My student loans were in default. My credit was shot. I was about to lose my apartment. And the business, it was so close to succeeding. I just needed capital to keep going for a few more months. So you decided to destroy my financial future to save yours? I didn't think of it that way. I told myself it was a loan. A real loan that I'd pay back before you ever knew. I convinced myself I wasn't really hurting anyone." Margaret laughed bitterly. "You're 24 years old, Sophie. Old enough to know that stealing is stealing regardless of your intentions." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of broken trust filling the space between them. Outside, a car alarm went off, its rhythmic shrieking a soundtrack to their mutual misery. Finally, Sophie asked, "What are you going to do?" Margaret had been dreading this question all day. "I don't know. The credit union said I need to file a fraud claim. That would trigger an investigation. You could be arrested, charged with identity theft, fraud, forgery. You could go to jail." Sophie's face went white. "Mom, please." "Or I could absorb the debt, destroy my credit, potentially my retirement, to protect you from the consequences of your actions." Again. "Again?" "Yes, again. Do you think I don't know about the credit card you took out in college and maxed out? I paid it off and never said anything. Or the time you borrowed from my emergency fund to pay for that spring break trip." "I noticed, Sophie. I always noticed. But I thought if I just loved you enough, helped you enough, eventually you'd grow out of this entitlement." Sophie was sobbing now. Ugly, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. "I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I know I'm a terrible daughter. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, Mom, please don't send me to jail." "I'll do anything. I'll pay you back if it takes the rest of my life. I'll get a real job. I'll go to therapy. Whatever you want." Margaret watched her daughter cry and felt her own heart breaking. This was still her baby, the little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who made her handmade cards for Mother's Day, who gave the valedictorian speech at her high school graduation. How had that bright, promising child become someone capable of this? "I need time," Margaret said finally. "I need to think about what's best. Not just for you, but for me. For both of us, really." "How much time?" "I don't know. Days. Maybe weeks. In the meantime, you need to start making payments on that loan immediately. I don't care if you have to sell everything you own, take 3 jobs, whatever it takes. The bleeding has to stop." "I will. I'll start tomorrow. And Sophie, we need to talk about boundaries. Real boundaries. Because whether or not I file charges, our relationship has fundamentally changed. The trust is gone. Do you understand that?" Sophie nodded miserably. "I understand. I don't think you do. Not yet, but you will." Margaret stood, a clear signal the conversation was over. "You should go now. I'll be in touch when I've made my decision." Sophie stood slowly, seeming to age years in the space of their conversation. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her, saw the desperation, the shame, but also something else. A calculating quality she'd been blind to before. I don't know, Sophie. I honestly don't know. Forgiveness requires repentance, and repentance requires change. Real change, not just words. Sophie gathered her things, moving toward the door like a condemned prisoner. She paused at the threshold. I love you, Mom. Despite everything, that's real. That's always been real. I love you too, Margaret said because it was true. Love wasn't the problem. Love was what made this betrayal cut so deep. But sometimes, love isn't enough. After Sophie left, Margaret locked the door and leaned against it, finally allowing her own tears to fall. She cried for the daughter she thought she'd raised, for the trust that could never be fully rebuilt, for the financial security that had been stolen from her. But mostly, she cried for the realization that she'd been enabling Sophie's behavior for years, mistaking help for love, protection for parenting. When the tears finally stopped, Margaret made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table with the yellow legal pad. This time, the words came easily. She wrote down every instance she could remember of Sophie's financial deceptions, from the small, taking money from her purse in high school, to the large, this current betrayal. The pattern was clear, escalating, and damning. She thought about her own parents, immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to give their children opportunities. They'd been strict, demanding honesty and hard work above all else. Margaret had rebelled against their rigidity, vowing to be a different kind of parent, warmer, more understanding, more forgiving. But had she swung too far in the opposite direction? Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Made an appointment with a financial counselor for tomorrow. Also going to apply for a second job. I meant what I said. I'll make this right. Margaret didn't respond. Words were easy. Sophie had always been good with words. Instead, she pulled out her laptop and began researching her options. Legal websites, financial advice forums, support groups for parents of adult children with behavioral issues. The internet was full of stories like hers, parents discovering their children had stolen from them, destroyed their credit, betrayed their trust in ways that seemed incomprehensible. One forum post particularly struck her. The hardest part isn't the money. It's grieving the child you thought you had while dealing with the child you actually have. Margaret read story after story, finding cold comfort in shared misery. Some parents had pressed charges, sending their children to jail. Others had absorbed the debt and cut contact. A few had worked out payment plans and rebuilt their relationships slowly, carefully, with professional help. There was no consensus on the right path forward, only the universal acknowledgement that trust, once broken at this level, could never be fully restored. By midnight, Margaret had made a decision. Not about pressing charges, that would require more thought, but about her immediate next steps. Tomorrow, she would go to a notary public and create a legal record of everything. She would document the fraud, have her statement notarized, create a paper trail that could be used if necessary. She would also see a lawyer, even if it meant putting it on a credit card, to understand her full options. And she would start therapy. Not family therapy with Sophie, not yet, maybe not ever, but individual therapy to understand her own role in creating this situation. Because as much as Sophie owned her choices, Margaret had to own hers too. Every bailout, every overlooked transgression, every time she'd chosen to be her daughter's friend instead of her parent, those choices had led here too. The radiator clanked its midnight song as Margaret finally prepared for bed. She moved Sophie's Christmas sweater to the back of her closet, unable to bear wearing it but not ready to throw it away. In the bathroom mirror, she saw her mother's face looking back at her, the same worried lines, the same weary eyes. Her parents had been right about more than she'd wanted to admit. "I'm sorry, Ma," she whispered to her reflection, thinking of her mother who'd passed 5 years ago, her mother who'd warned her about spoiling Sophie, who'd seen what Margaret had refused to see. "You tried to tell me." In her bedroom, Margaret pulled out an old photo album, flipping through pictures of Sophie's childhood, birthday parties, school plays, graduations. In every photo, Sophie smiled brilliantly, a child who'd never wanted for love or support. But had that been enough? Had it been the right kind of love? The right kind of support? She closed the album and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and notaries and difficult decisions. But tonight, Margaret Chen lay in her bed in Queens, listening to the sounds of the city that never sleeps, and mourned the loss of something more precious than money or credit scores. She mourned the loss of trust between a mother and daughter, a bond she'd believed unbreakable until today had proved otherwise. Sleep came fitfully, bringing dreams of Sophie as a child, reaching out for her mother's hand. But when Margaret reached back, her daughter's hand turned to smoke, leaving nothing but empty air and the echo of broken promises. The first phase of her new reality had begun. Tomorrow, she would start the legal process of protecting herself from the child she'd spent 24 years trying to protect from the world. The irony was as bitter as the tears that dampened her pillow in the dark hours before dawn.